It's so funny to want to even look back and say, what is the original thing that got you into it? How did I get started with snowboarding? What got me into snowboarding? Once I was 10, I was allowed to go and explore. I wasn't allowed to leave the neighborhood, but I could explore the neighborhood. And the need for finding a hill in a relatively flat neighborhood was huge. I needed to find the next big hill. What was bigger? What made me go faster? What was a taller hill? Just before features, before anything, just riding straight in a line before I knew how to turn or stop. It was just, where's the next biggest hill? And that evolved into, well, this person has a really big hill in their yard, but I don't know who lives there, but I really want to snowboard this hill. Growing up in the Midwest, we got beautiful terrain, but there's nothing mountainous, there's nothing super big, rolling hill-wise. And it was just, okay, this guy's got a big hill in his yard, I gotta befriend this person. And the person ends up being a friend of mine years later, because I was like, hey, I wanna ride my snowboard on your hill. They're not into snowboarding, you get them into it just from years of them watching you do it and using their yard. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful moments like that, I think, of what kept me doing it. So I was probably 10 when I got involved in snowboarding for real. I don't think I got my first real snowboard with metal edges until I was 14, which put a big gap in my snowboarding career. About 4 years where I'd never even seen a groomed hill before. And I guess that's what kind of accelerated the urban thing later in my life, coming back looking at snowboarding completely differently. I think that's what got me into the urban part of it. Urban to me was, I think it was the need to want to go back to that childhood feeling of searching for a hill locally. After I had grown and realized that I can travel and take my snowboarding to a real mountain, or to take it to somewhere bigger than Michigan has to offer. And then when you come home and you're sort of stuck inside for, well, I mean, this year, a lot of different reasons we were stuck inside, but you start to look around the environment and look for something that makes your brain start to turn again. After so long of being dormant, I felt like my creative brain was stuck in a doldrum, especially with my snowboarding. And it's like, okay, now we've got to come up with this way to tackle a challenge that's right in front of you. When you go to a park and everything's perfectly manicured and everything is set up to hit this one thing, you don't want to diverge too much from it. There's not a lot of creative energy that's flowing. It's right in front of you. You use it to the best of your ability. When I look around the urban environment, I'm like, okay, I don't really have a whole lot to work with other than what's there. It sort of forces your creativity. People ask you for inspiration. Well, what inspires you to do this, or what inspires you to do that? It's not really an inspiration thing. It's more of a necessity thing. It's more, what do I have access to right now? I've got a little rail and an 8-foot drop. And it's like, how can I get creative with what's here and without bringing anything into this environment? Because this environment's constantly changing. I look around right now and there's no snow, and it's like, yeah, we did all that, built all this just to hit this feature. And it seems so silly when you say it out loud. Basic and important things are obviously your takeoff, the actual feature you're looking at hitting, and then the landing. But there is a lot more that goes into it with urban. Is there stuff on the ground, especially in the winter? It's really good that we're here right now looking at the landscape in the spring. Obviously, I would want to come back more towards the fall if I was looking at a different spot in this particular park, but it's very much knowing what's there ahead of time, because when it's covered in snow, you don't really have an idea unless you go and check every square foot of the snow to check what's under it. But it's just a lot of building, a lot of prep work, a lot of looking, a lot of trial and error, and you always have to have that thought in the back of your mind that it might not work out and that you might need to modify your original plan or your original idea, or you might need to just scrap the whole thing and move on to something else and try to find the silver lining in that. I know one of the challenges I had to overcome with a spot was something as simple as getting the help to build it day after day for 3 days in a row, to find out that when we actually strapped into our snowboards to try what we were going to try at the spot, it wasn't going to work. It just wasn't going to work at all. So the silver lining in that is that after we decided to leave and to move on, we ended up finding one of the best spots for at least the entire project that we filmed in February. After 3 days of working on a spot, just deciding it's time to move on, and pretty much wasting our time at that point if none of us could get a trick. Having the mental capacity to be able to walk away from something, because that can be really defeating, especially when you put in with snow, physically shoveling a lot of snow into a spot for it to just not work out. Going through, of course it's in the back of your head, but it's never really in the forefront if everything else looks good. It's more of a challenge to myself. I think you can get hurt just as easily at the groomed park going for something you don't have any business going for, or trying a trick that you're not comfortable trying. Sometimes even more so. You feel like you're at that groomed park and the landing's perfect and they just groomed this morning, and you have this false sense of confidence in your ability level. Have this in your mind that you can do something because of somebody else's work. You trust the jump, you trust the landing. There's a different element to it when you yourself go out 3 days before you film and you hand built that spot, and you know the lip and you know the trajectory and you know that you built it all yourself. I mean, it's really about trusting yourself. I don't think there's any more or less risk doing something urban than there is doing something at the park. But the urban environment sort of forces you to adapt to your surroundings and adjust as you need to. Definitely when you step out of your comfort zone and you try something new, there can be some fear or some hesitation, but I mean, if you were scared or if you're fearful, you probably had no business being there in the first place. Something got you there, and you need to remember that something in you got you to that moment. And you can look at your worst case scenario and you can have it in the back of your mind, like, okay, this is probably the worst that could happen. But remember, it can always be worse than that. But on top of it, it can always be better than that. It can always go better than you expected. And I think those moments are worth that gamble. It's worth that risk. I think the risk to reward ratio goes up as you have that inherent fear in the back of your mind. I would never tell anyone what they should or could or not to do, but I do believe firmly that you can't live your life in fear, and you can't live your life in fear of your ability level, because you only ever really get better at something unless you're at least beautifully able-bodied people with these mental inabilities. Like, I think that's why the physicality of snowboarding is so interesting to me, and like bringing style and like creativeness to it, because to me it is a coping mechanism. Everybody I've met through the snowboarding community is dealing with something, or they're exercising, or they're using their body, or it's like to some people it's like a choreographed dance routine, but to me it's always been a coping mechanism. It's always been something to go out and to use to turn off my thoughts and to really access that creative side of my brain that you can't when you're caught up thinking about other stuff.